What is up, my friends, and welcome to another edition of the XFL Week in Review. I'm your host, Mark Perry, editor of XFL News Hub, and on this week's show, we got Paul Woods, a CFL journalist and Canadian football historian. We talk about the current state of the CFL, kind of how we got here, how they got here. Really interesting stuff. He has an upcoming book about the 1991 Argonauts, which would be a fantastic documentary or even movie. So we get to talk about all that, his take on what's going on as somebody who has followed the league since he was a kid. It's a great interview, and I'm excited for you to show that to you. Plus the latest on this Houston Roughnecks logo situation, and also my take on the Arash Madani interview with XFL Markcast. I might make some friends, I might make some enemies, but hey, I just cut it to you straight, my friends, and you know that, and you've been following me since 2018. 2019, maybe we started this podcast, and we've been here through the whole thing, so you get my take on that, and as only I can do. And can you dig that, sucker? I'll just throw that out there too. And all right, so how do you get in touch with the show? It's simple. Email podcast at xflnewshub.com with your MP3s or videos, or call 888-430-7692, extension 3. Again, a little shout out to my man Booker T. And leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. We'll read it on the show. We appreciate that as always. And plus, like and subscribe to us on our YouTube channel. And that makes us very happy. And also like and subscribe the XFL Markcast channel as well. Keep supporting both of our podcasts here on XFL News Hub. We appreciate that. Cool. So let's get into some quick tidbits. We got a long show. We're going to skip the social media stuff this week because I don't want to go too long. We got my interview with Paul Woods. We got my rant, chat, talk, whatever you want to say about this interview that happened on XFL Markcast that came out this Friday. And so we got the latest news plus what's going on with the Houston Roughnecks logo. Before we get into the Roughnecks news and our interview with Paul Woods and my little take at the end, first, let's get into some quick news and notes of the week. First, Cincinnati Bengals have added DC Defenders defensive coordinator Louis Coffey to their staff. Now remember, he is interesting because they hired him as the defensive quality control coach this past Friday. He was with the team staff in 97 to 2010 as a defensive assistant and defensive backs coach. Now, before the XFL season started in 2020, defensive coordinator Jeff Fitzgerald, who was picked by Pep Hamilton, had resigned from the team. That was just before the season started, citing some family issues. And then that's how Kofi was promoted to defensive coordinator's role with the DC Defenders. Had a lot of experience in the NFL with the Browns, Titans, Cardinals, and Jets. Also was with the Atlanta Legends of the AAF. So congratulations to Mr. Louis. Again, one of your America's team, the DC Defenders. Congratulations on him on landing his gig. Now, we're going to talk a lot today about the CFL because the CFL and XFL, you know what's going on here. So it's really important that we understand what's going on with the CFL because that's going to lead us to what's going to happen with the XFL. So that's why I think it's important to cover these things. So one of the things that happened this week is a report by Arash Madani, again, person that we'll talk about in a little bit, and this is actually the first time I've ever mentioned him in any article. Maybe I have before, I don't know. Is reporting that the CFL will officially announce a delay of the 2021 season on April 19th. So mark that on your calendars, April 19th. He also kind of hinted that there could potentially be some kind of other announcement around the XFL and kind of what's going on with their talks. So stay tuned for that. Around that, that would be on Monday, a week from today, and we'll have full coverage of what that is also. Again, also, sports radio host Rod Peterson also reported over the weekend of some reasons why the CFL season will be delayed and why the XFL and CFL are even talking in the first place. He says he's spoken to 5 sources whose story on the CFL-XFL merger and the 2020 season. Basically, it boils down to MLSC, and that's a name that you're going to be hearing a lot about. They're a very powerful group in Canada, the Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment, the owners of the Toronto Argonauts. and they want to delay / maybe even cancel the season, and they're the driving force behind this whole talks with the XFL, according to his sources. Now, it should be noted that MLSE also owns the Toronto Maple Leafs of the NHL and Toronto Raptors of the NBA. That's a lot of teams. Also, they own Rogers Communications, who owns Sportsnet. And Sportsnet, which is also an owner of a 37% owner of MLSE. Okay. Also, Bell Media Inc., which owns TSN, is a subsidiary of BCE Inc., which also owns 37% of MLSE. Why? And these are important facts. Why is this important to you? Paul Woods and myself go over that, and I also go over that in my little rant later. So this is a big name that's been thrown out. You heard the guys on 3 Down Nation on this show talk about MLSE, and they're basically involved in all sports in Canada. They're basically the big player out there, and they have a lot to do with how things are moving with this XFL and CFL talk. So it's important that you guys know who they are and who they are connected to, because it just gets interesting. It's been a very crazy week. It supposedly would be even crazier week. Stay tuned to Rod Peterson's podcast or show that's on noon on you can find it on YouTube, you can find it on Facebook, and listen to his show. Apparently they'll have some news this week about more of this kind of inside stuff going. So a place that you want to go check out, we do all the time, is a great show, and I love learning about even just Canadian culture, and then the CFL game and hockey, and it's been a lot of fun listening to his show. So check his show out this week for more details of what's going on there. Also, this came out this week. The CFL PA sent out a memo to his players. I didn't know else how to put this headline other than they basically said, "Don't quit your day job." So that kind of tells you of what's going on with the CFL season. They sent out this memo basically saying that, again, it's not 100% the CFL's fault. There's, cases are rising in Canada. So that playing a big factor in even having meetings with multiple people, because there's a lot of things that are locked down in different provinces and that kind of thing. So that is part of the problem. And also, there's not been any news from the league. However, we might hear something on April 19th that could kind of open the doors up a little more. So that's all the drama. There is a lot of drama with our friends up north. We have some U.S.-based news too. The Spring League announced this week that they are coming back for a 6-week regular season beginning on Thursday, May 6th. Games will be on Fox Sports. Apparently, they're going to have all the games on there on Fox Sports 1, so that's pretty cool. They also added 2 new team names, the Linemen and the Sea Lions. The Linemen kind of looks like the logo of the Houston Roughnecks, but they're on there. If you really want to get a great glimpse as to what the plans are for the Spring League, definitely check out XFL Markcast, because they have Brian Woods, CEO, on there. And it was a great, interesting interview that they had on that podcast as well. All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to get into the Houston logo situation. Then we'll get right into our interview with Paul Woods. Then we'll get into my rant, and then we'll wrap up the show. So without further ado, folks, let's just get into the real week that was the XFL/CFL. Well, it looks like the battle of the Houston Roughnecks logos are now over, as they took a little ugly turn on Wednesday, as court documents filed showed that the league, the XFL, has abandoned the main oil derrick rig logo as well as the secondary man logo. It came out after the beginning of the year that the NFL properties had moved forward with its opposition they filed when the trademarks were applied for. The process, however, takes time. After the United States Patent and Trademark Office officially published the marks, the NFL began the process of having them taken down. The Tennessee Titans franchise opposed the main logo with the oil derrick, and the New England Patriots did the same for the man logo, both claiming that the new ones could confuse customers into thinking they were buying NFL merchandise, but the league not gaining any revenue from this sale. There's some more court documents in there. Our own Josh Davis spoke with IP attorney Josh Gerben about the documents and have been able to confirm that these two logos will no longer be associated with the Houston Roughnecks. The language in the filing says, quote, applicants expressly abandon application with prejudice, close quote, prohibits them from moving forward. Gerben says, with that type of wording, not only would it be impossible for the XFL to move forward with those applications, but they wouldn't be able to refile in the future with the same logos. Now, this has nothing to do with the Houston Roughnecks name. There's no reason to think that the team is changing its name at all, just the logo and the graphics that were used. I assume that the colors would stay the same as well, and our own Jay Noakes clarified that as well on Twitter. So relax. The Houston Roughnecks aren't leaving. The Houston Roughnecks will stay. It's just that the logo will change. It's just that the logo will change when we get back in the field, hopefully in 2022, most likely in 2023. It should be noted that the specific applications that have been abandoned for use of clothing and uniforms, a separate application was filed for electronic and digital use. The oppositions have now moved onto those filings, and we should see clearly the same result. Also, the Houston Astros have also opposed the trademark filed by the XFL Roughnecks as well for the H. That too is currently in process, and an extension was filed on February 16th. With the league in discussion with the CFL, it's not yet known when we will see our teams back on the field, but we do know that the Roughnecks will definitely have a new look when they do come back to the field. My question is, does the XFL get their money back from the guys who designed the logos, that they knew that this could be a problem? All right, we're here with Paul Woods. Paul, I guess why don't you I always like to ask my guests, give us your superhero origin story. How did you get from high school kid all the way to now writing a book and covering the Toronto Argonauts?
Well, thanks for having me, Mark. That's a great question. I don't consider myself a superhero, but I can go for that for sure.
Everybody has an origin story.
There you go. That's right. So I mean, I became an Argo fan as a kid. I was born in 1957, and around 68 or so, I got into sports for the first time, and I became very fascinated by the Argonauts because at that time they were the coolest. They were the coolest pro team, basically. They were the only pro team in any sport that had guys with long hair, band of renegades. I really loved their uniforms. I loved their colors, the double blue colors. And my dad was an Argo fan. So I became an Argo fan. And I followed them, reasonably closely over the next decade. But in about the end of 1976, for some reason, and I don't know exactly why, but for some reason, I decided I'm going to become a serious, diehard, dedicated fan of this team. And I'm gonna, collect everything I can. I'm gonna make scrapbooks about the stories in the papers, and I'm gonna follow them religiously. And so I've been sort of doing that ever since. I mean, the scrapbook idea went out the window about 78 because it just became too much time to glue it all together. But I've been still collecting, everything I can get my hands on written wise related to the Argos and to a certain extent the Canadian Football League as well. Mm-hmm. Once I moved to, I grew up in London, Ontario, which is about 2 hours outside of Toronto. But I moved to Toronto in 1980, got seasons tickets in 81, which happened to be the worst year in team history. But I still loved the team, and I loved going to those games at Exhibition Stadium, the old stadium. I was working in journalism at the time, and I spent a couple of years. Most of my time in journalism was as an editor or running a newsroom. But I did have a couple of years. I got transferred out to Calgary for 2 years in the late 80s, and I got to cover the Stampeders. Got to cover some Grey Cups in Vancouver, including the game that I consider the greatest Grey Cup of all time, the 87 Grey Cup. The Argos lost on a last-minute field goal to Edmonton, but it was an unbelievable game when the lead changed hands 4 times in the fourth quarter. The biggest stars in the league all scored giant touchdowns that game. It was an amazing spectacle, and I got to be there, which incidentally coincided with almost the low point of the CFL. I mean, they've had a lot of low points over the years, but 87 was the year that the Montreal Alouettes folded, and a 9-team league, which had been a 9-team league for more than 30 years, became an 8-team league, and the league was kind of teetering. And in fact, I didn't hear this comment myself, but one of my colleagues at Canadian Press, who was also at the Grey Cup that year in '87, got onto an elevator after the game with the commissioner of the league, Doug Mitchell, who said, "Man, we really needed that game because the league was that close to sort of dying, basically."
Wow.
And so then I moved back to Toronto in '93. I actually kept my season's tickets for most of my time. I was out west for 7 years, and for most of that time, I kept the tickets. My dad used them. I was waiting for the move into Skydome, which happened in '89 while I was out west. And I moved back to Toronto in '93, and I had season's tickets pretty much every year since then. When I sort of retired from my first journalism career, I left Canadian Press in 2011 after 31 years, and I was still pretty young. I was still in my 50s, and thought I got life left of me. What am I going to do? And I thought one day, I've always wanted to read a book about the 1983 Argonauts. That was the year that they broke a 31-year drought to win the Grey Cup after 31 mostly miserable, terrible seasons. And they finally, after 3 decades, broke through and won the Grey Cup. And I thought, I've always wanted to read a book about that. No one's going to write it, so I'll do it. So I did. I spent the next a year roughly, interviewing guys from the team and guys from around the league and so on, and put together a book about that '83 team. It actually covers '81 to '83, so it's like going from the worst year in history in '81 to finally ending the drought in '83. And there were some, amazing players back then. Condredge Holloway, who was a huge star at Tennessee, was the quarterback, and Terry Greer, who just got into the Canadian Football Hall of Fame this past year, set a record by going over 2,000 yards receiving in '83, and there were just lots of great stories. So I did the book, and then I always had it in the back of my mind, I'd love to do a book about the '91 to '94 Argos, which was '91 was what I call the most magical, electrifying year in the history of the team. They've been around for 148 years. I think they're the oldest football team in the world, the oldest gridiron football team in the world since 1873. And so that's 148 years. And I don't think there's ever been a season as crazy and as wild as '91. They were bought by Wayne Gretzky, John Candy, and Bruce McNall. Those guys outbid the NFL for Rocket Ismail from Notre Dame. He was going to be the #1 draft pick, and they spent an outlandish amount of money to bring him up to Canada. It was the last time the Argonauts were basically on the sporting map in Toronto. And so I've now written that book, and it's coming out in a few months. It's called Year of the Rocket, and it actually talks about not only '91 but also '92, '93, and then when the team was sold in '94. But the primary focus is that '91, that crazy '91 season. The Argos are a real part of me. I've got a huge love for the team, huge love for the Canadian Football League, but I'm worried, really seriously worried, that football as it now stands in Toronto is not going to succeed. And that's why I'm one of the few Canadians, I think, who is massively in favor of this XFL. I want a full-scale merger. I want 2 9-team conferences. I want the whole thing. And the sooner the better, as far as I'm concerned.
So you brought up that there was this, as you followed the league, that there was this time when it was teetering, and you talked about that big game. I mean, what's the similarities and differences between the league teetering back then to where it is now? Has it always been just fans in the stands or economics?
Well, it's interesting. The league's what's the word? The league's kind of story arc is quite interesting. I mean, it was if you go back to the 50s, they routinely, paid more than the NFL. They outbid the NFL for Heisman Trophy winners a few times back in the 50s. It was primarily Canadian players, but starting around late 40s, they started bringing up American players. They called them imports, and the Argos actually were the last team to go for imports, and they had a run of 3 consecutive Grey Cup champions from 45 to 47 with all Canadian lineups, and then the floodgates opened and Americans started to come out. I shouldn't say floodgates, because there's never been, the rosters have always had more Canadians than Americans on them. But over time, the number of Americans has increased and the number of American starters has increased. But the leagues, the CFL and the NFL kind of coexisted and were at a relatively similar kind of pay scale and stuff through the 50s and 60s. In the 1970s, in the early 70s, around the time I became a huge fan in late 60s and then into the early 70s, the Argos were run by a guy named Leo Cahill, who was probably the most charismatic figure that Canadian football's ever seen. He was the coach of the Argonauts and really the mastermind of. He was the guy that allowed these guys to have long hair and to be renegades and do all kinds of crazy stuff. And I mean, they outbid the NFL for big draft choices. Tim Anderson, I think, was a first-round draft choice of San Francisco. The Argos signed him. Jim Corrigal, who was a Canadian kid out of Kent State, was a second-round pick by St. Louis. The Argos brought him in. They brought in Jim Stillwagon, who had won the Outland Trophy as the U.S. college top lineman. They brought in Joe Theismann. I mean, Joe Theismann came out of Notre Dame, and he got drafted in the 4th round by Miami. They wanted to turn him into a punt returner, and he came to Toronto and played quarterback for 3 seasons. And then we all know he went back to the NFL. He led the Redskins to the Super Bowl, and he's been a face on TV ever since, right?
Yes.
And then it's interesting that there was the league really grew in the 70s. I mean, the Argos stadium expanded from 33,000 seats. They sold it out in Leo Cahill's era. They sold out 33,000 seats. They were by far the healthiest, wealthiest franchise in the Canadian Football League during that period. And they were actually subsidizing the poorer teams. There was a gate equalization thing where the visiting team would get a chunk of the proceeds from the game, and 33,000 people coming into Exhibition Stadium sent the Saskatchewan Roughriders home with a nice check after their visit every year or whatever. And then baseball came to Toronto. The stadium got expanded to 54,000 seats for football. Montreal got the Olympics in 1976 and built Olympic Stadium, which was basically a 70,000 seat stadium. And so you go back to 1977, there was a game, Toronto at Montreal, 69,000 fans in Olympic Stadium, the biggest crowd in Canadian Football League history. Montreal was just, as a sidebar, Montreal was 7-0 going into that game. The Argos were 2-5. The Argos beat the Alouettes for Montreal's first loss of the year, and there were 69,000 fans there. And then Edmonton got the Commonwealth Games, and the Americans don't really know what the Commonwealth Games are, but it's like the Olympics, but just for the Commonwealth, which is all the countries that are sort of affiliated with Britain through ties to the monarchy. Gotcha. And so the Commonwealth Games came to Edmonton in '78, and they built Commonwealth Stadium, which started off, I think, at about 45,000 seats and got up to 60,000. And so there was then BC Place opened in Vancouver in '83, and it was a 60,000 seat dome. And so you had Exhibition Stadium with 54,000 seats, and the Big O in Montreal was 70, and Edmonton had 50 to 60, and BC had 60. And those stadiums were packed back then. The Argos were so huge back in like 77, 78 that they would get 50,000 people for an intra-squad game in preseason. Right. Wow. It was just unbelievable. And of course, then even back then, they were still going for big stars. They brought up Anthony Davis came up in '76. He was a USC running back who had broken some of O.J. Simpson's records, scored 6 touchdowns once in a game against Notre Dame. Wow. And he played for a year, I think, in the old World League. And then he came to the Argos in '76 and was a complete bust. He was gone. And then 2 years later, Leo was back as coach for his second stint, and he brought in Terry Metcalf. Terry Metcalf had led the NFL in all-purpose yards for the St. Louis Cardinals, was a free agent. In those days, free agency didn't really allow players to move teams the way it does now. So he signed with the Argos in '78 and played 3 seasons up here. Mm-hmm. The Argos outbid the NFL for Bruce Clark in '91. He was the 4th overall pick by the Green Bay Packers. Montreal brought in Tom Cousineau, who was the number 1 pick of the NFL draft, a linebacker out of Ohio State. And then Montreal had actually the beginning of the end for the Alouettes. The first iteration of the Alouettes was '81 when they had a guy named Nelson Scalabrini owned the team. He brought in all kinds of high-priced talent. Vince Ferragamo had led the Rams to a Super Bowl game. They lost, but he was in the Super Bowl. 2 years later, he signs with the Alouettes. They signed Billy White Shoes Johnson away from the Houston Oilers. They signed David Overstreet and Keith Gary, who were first-round draft picks. James Scott was a very good receiver for Chicago. All these guys came to the Alouettes in '81. They were awful. It's one of the crazy stories about Canadian football. In those days, the top 3 teams in each division made the playoffs. And I said 81 was the worst year in Argonauts history. They were 2-14 that year. Montreal made the playoffs with 3 wins and 13 losses.
Oh.
So it was crazy, right? And then Ottawa got to the Grey Cup with a 5-11 record and almost won the game against the greatest dynasty Canadian football's ever seen. So there was all this success going on, and then Montreal went to hell real quick. Like after that 81 season, interest dried up completely in Montreal. The Argos played game in the Olympic Stadium in 82, and I think there might have been 6,000 people in a 60,000 seat stadium.
Wow.
They were gone by 87. The Argos made the first of many corporate and ownership mistakes by not responding to the brilliant marketing of the new baseball team, the Toronto Blue Jays. They came in 77 and they marketed to families and young kids and reasonably priced tickets. It's a great day in the ballpark. And the Argos had this belief. Hey, Ralph Sazio came to the team in 81 as general manager. Ralph believed that all you got to do to sell tickets is be a winning team. No, you need to do a lot more than that in Toronto. And baseball became the beginning of the downfall of the Argonauts franchise. They built Skydome in 89. It was built because there was a Grey Cup game played in 82 in Toronto, which was a pouring rain, just absolute torrent of rain. And after that game, the politicians had the will. The premier of the province was a huge Argo fan. And so he decided, we're going to get a better stadium. We're going to get a retractable roof dome stadium, which they built at ridiculous expense. It ended up costing about $600 million, which was a ton of money back in those days. And unfortunately, it was built way more for baseball than football. It was a terrible facility to watch football in. So the Argos became the second-class citizens in their own building. And then they had a series of bad owners and bad ownership decisions. And the league had a lot of teetering on the brink in a lot of places. The Calgary Stampeders almost went out of business in 85. Montreal did go out of business in 87. The Saskatchewan Roughriders, who are unquestionably the most successful franchise in the league at the moment, they had to have a telethon in 88, I believe it was, just to raise funds to keep going. As I mentioned 91 being the most magical, electrifying year of the Argos with Gretzky and Candy and the Rocket and all the hype and hoopla that followed that team around. Their first game that year was in Ottawa. And a month later, the Ottawa Rough Riders filed for bankruptcy and the keys were taken away from them. And the league ran the team for the rest of the year. So a whole lot of stories about, is the league going to survive? Is the league on the break? And just gradually over time, you've had the Raptors came to Toronto and became a big thing. The MLS got here. TFC became a big thing, very well marketed by MLSE, which now owns the Argonauts as well. And meanwhile, the NFL, the aura around the NFL became so huge with the amount of money they pay for players and the incredible televised spectacle. And we've always had tons of NFL games broadcast into Canada because we've had, Canada was an early adopter of cable. And so there were NFL games, at least 2 games every day, every Sunday across this country. And now there's a multitude of them, even without a direct TV package. And so all that stuff added up, and slowly over time, interest has waned particularly in Toronto. I mean, it's been up and down in other markets. There were years when Hamilton was on the brink, and now Hamilton's very solid footing under their owner, Bob Young. Ottawa left in 96, came back. The new team failed, left. Now it's firmly entrenched in that market. So there's lots of pockets where the CFL is very successful. It's not successful in the 3 biggest markets, Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver. And living in this market, in the Toronto market, and having followed the Argos as closely as I have for the last 50 years, I don't know that I see it getting better under the current structure of a 9-team Canadian Football League. I just don't think football, Canadian football as it now stands, is ever going to be seen as a cool thing in this market. I think if they did merge with the XFL and they made the rules really exciting, and they had, instead of always being Hamilton or Saskatchewan coming to town, you had New York and Los Angeles and Houston coming to town sometimes. Mm-hmm. I think it's got potential to work. But to me, it's a home run play, and they need to do it, because I'm worried that 2 years from now, I may not have a team to go watch if they don't make this work.
Now, in Toronto, how would you rank the Argos as far as the Blue Jays and the Toronto Maple Leafs? Like where do they? Yeah. Let's just say this: where do they rank now And where did they rank maybe in the 80s and 90s?
Well, that's a great question. Right now, they rank fifth. I mean, they're obviously the Leafs are by far the biggest thing. I mean, above all, people say it's not a hockey town, it's a Leafs town, and it is. It's absolutely, the Leafs are gigantic. The Raptors are now gigantic, and I think that is firmly entrenched. They're not going to make the playoffs this year, and their championship may not be repeated for a long time. But the Raptors they've marketed themselves so effectively, and they're also part of the second or third biggest sports league in the world behind the NFL and maybe the Premier League in England. But so it's a big deal. So hockey and basketball are way up in Toronto. The Blue Jays have had their ups and downs. They've had years where they struggled at the gate. I at times in the past 20 years, I thought the Blue Jays might go out of business, that they might be gone.
Really?
Now I think they're probably here to stay, although their stadium is terrible even for baseball. They got to get out of that big dome. But they're third. TFC is fourth. TFC, and this is one of the odd things though, Mark, is that TFC draws the TV ratings are a fraction of what the Argos get, but TFC gets 24 to 27,000 fans in their building, and they're having a rollicking good time, and those 24 to 27,000 fans see their thing as a cool thing. So the Argos are not seen as cool. They're certainly, the audience is aging. They're trying to do what they can to bring in younger people, but it's a lot of guys like me with no hair and been around for a long time.
I don't have any hair either.
There you go. And to ask what they were, I mean, there was a time back in, I would say in between 1970 and 1977, the Argos and the Leafs were basically on the same level. I mean, the Argos would be on the front page of the sports section, even if the Leafs did something big. So they're now fifth. And a pretty far fifth. And honestly, they're probably below the NFL in Toronto in terms of consciousness. The sports fan in the NFL in Toronto, more of them follow the NFL than follow the Argos. I don't think there's any doubt about that.
So if something were to, because there's been a lot of talk about, especially the Toronto market and MLSE, and we'll get into that in a second. But if somehow the Argos were not, I mean, Toronto is the biggest market.
Yep.
And so if they were pulled the plug and were out of the CFL, would that just that would be the end? I mean, are they like the glue that keeps things together, or could they survive without Toronto?
What I have said a number of times online is that if the Argos were to leave the CFL, I believe you would soon be down to a 4 to 6 team league with a salary cap of about maybe $1 million, not the 5.5 that it is now. The Toronto is the biggest market, and it's also the place where all the advertisers and sponsors are most focused. And it's the city of Toronto, or the greater Toronto area, has something like 12 million people. It's got a third of Canada. So you lose that, and I think the TSN TV contract would be worth way less money than it currently provides to the league. And advertisers and sponsors would gradually think, well, do we really need to focus on something that's a big deal in Winnipeg, Regina, Calgary, and Edmonton, maybe Hamilton, maybe Ottawa, though I don't see them long-term surviving without the Argos, and Montreal, Vancouver, Toronto. I mean, if Toronto goes, I think Montreal and Vancouver are not long afterward, because they're also struggling in those markets. I think the league needs a healthy Toronto franchise. And I think what's happening here is that the MLSE, the owners of the Argonauts, have come to the conclusion that we can't make this thing a success as they define success. And I don't think it's only about profit. It's clearly about profit to some extent, but it's also about enterprise value. I mean, you think of, whatever was paid for the franchise value of the Raptors in 1995, it has skyrocketed now. The Raptors are probably worth $1.5 billion. The Leafs are probably worth $1.5 billion. TFC, even though some people think MLS is just a Ponzi scheme designed to keep bringing in new franchises, TFC theoretically has a value of 100 million or more in terms of resale value. The Argonauts couldn't be sold right now for $5 million, I don't think. And so if MLSE wants to build that up, they got to find a way to do that. And I think that they actually see a merger with the XFL as being potentially able to do that. There may be that TFC's end game is, or Larry Tannenbaum's end game. He's our sort of the controlling partner in MLSE, and he may in fact be more interested in getting an NFL franchise than anything else. But I think that they believe that keeping football alive until that happens is important. Both certainly from a political standpoint, if nothing else. But they've got to figure out how to make it work. And there are a lot of times you'll read comments from fans on fan forums up here saying, screw MLSE, screw the Argos, let's move on without them. We don't need Toronto. Well, I'm sorry. Yes, you do. If you want to get a Bo Levi Mitchell or a Mike Riley and pay them $500,000 to play quarterback, you're going to need a Toronto franchise in the league, or you're going to have a whole lot less money coming into the coffers.
So because it's I mean, we're kind of new at this. We've only been, it's basically been a month, and when the XFL folded, for COVID, not for anything. It was a success.
Yeah.
And there's no question about it. I was looking.
Some markets more than others, but there were definitely some places where it was hot, and I think it would have survived. Absolutely.
Yeah. And then, I was looking in the CFL and I was like, it's hard to get games out here. And then now that with this merger thing, there's talk and there's excitement. But at the same time, now you have this NFL piece that has kind of creeped in the Toronto picture and you even mentioned it too. And it's been talked about that, there could be angling, especially because Roger Goodell had mentioned Canada being an important market.
Yeah.
And that could be more than just, hey, let's have a game there like we do in Mexico and London.
Yeah.
Are you hearing stuff about potential Toronto NFL franchise?
Well, we've been hearing that since 1975. There is a few people, including a longtime politician who's been in private business for a few decades. Paul Godfrey has been trying to get an NFL franchise ever since he managed to get a baseball franchise into Toronto. The talk comes up a lot. There's a lot of people who believe that if you put an NFL franchise in Toronto, it would be very successful, despite the fact that when the Bills played their 7 games in 5 seasons, whatever it was a big disaster. It didn't work very well at all, but there's a lot of reasons why that happened. But at the same time, there's got to be some realism here. You can't play an NFL. You can't put an NFL team in Sky Dome. The stadium is just awful. It's 32 years old now. It's not configured well for football. It is definitely not configured well for an NFL-sized, smaller football field. Most of the most expensive seats are miles from the action. It's crumbling. It's just you couldn't do that. You'd have to have a new stadium. And we know what, Dallas spent $2 billion for that stadium or whatever. You need state of the art. You're going to need to have a franchise fee that's going to have to be some enormous amount. Even if you'd managed to somehow move an existing team, you'd have to pay a lot of money for it. So I don't see that being very realistic in the short term. Long term, I'm sure there are going to be a lot of people. There are a lot of people right now, a lot of rich people in Toronto thinking about how could we do this? How can we make it happen? I'm sure Paul Godfrey is one of them. But that's a play that may happen at some point down the road. I don't think, frankly, I don't think there's a hell of a lot of value in the NFL coming to Toronto. They've already basically captured the Canadian market and certainly the Toronto market. There, people, you walk around on a Sunday in downtown Toronto and there are people walking into sports bars with Steelers jerseys and Bills jackets and Green Bay Packers outfits. They've kind of got the best of everything right now. And a lot of the advertisers who spend a lot of money on CBS and Fox and NBC and ESPN, they don't really care about the Canadian market, right? They're not looking to sell insurance. Geico's not selling insurance in Canada. Mm-hmm. So they don't care about the ratings up here. And the NFL already gets good ratings and they've already got a package. They sell their product to Bell, which is one of the 2 broadcast partners that own the Toronto Argonauts. And so the airwaves are full of NFL games every week already. And why would you want to dilute your revenue by adding another franchise in a market that's not really going to get you a lot back? I could see them going to London and Mexico City before they go to Toronto.
Interesting. Now, one of the things that I've learned is this whole MLSC deal. Some people make them out to be a villain in this narrative, but then there's this other part where it's like, well, if the league doesn't work and they want to change it, like, so where do you fall in this kind of story with them?
Well,
they own basically everything in Canadian sports.
Yeah, well, yeah. That's essentially in a way. Right, because the structure of MLSE, just so you know, is Larry Tannenbaum owns 25%, and then the other 75% is split equally between Rogers and Bell, and those are the two primary broadcasters in the country and the primary cable operators in the country. So Rogers has a huge sports network, which has no Canadian football on it right now. And Bell has a huge Canadian sports network, which has all of CFL on it. Rogers has the exclusive rights to the Blue Jays because Rogers owns the Blue Jays by itself. The two of them combined own the Leafs and the Raptors and TFC and the Argos. But it was interesting when the Argonauts ownership has changed hands twice in the last 5 years. First, it was sold to Tannenbaum and Bell, but not Rogers. And then 2 years later, Rogers bought in and it became an MLSE property. And I don't know if Rogers was brought in kicking and screaming, or whether they just decided, we're going to go in on this because of the possible prospect that maybe eventually we'll all get an NFL franchise. I don't really know. There's a lot of people that say Rogers, slags the CFL, and they don't provide much coverage of it. Not surprisingly, it's a competitive world. They're trying to draw viewers to their product, and their product has no Canadian football, and they don't have any NFL either, for that matter, because Bell has that exclusive rights. So Rogers, what little coverage they give the CFL often tends to be fairly negative.
And Rogers is Sportsnet.
Yes, Rogers is Sportsnet. That's right. So that's Arash Madani and other people like that. And there are fans there. Tim McAuliffe, who's one of their prime hosts, loves the CFL. But they often have little to say about it. MLSE is, there are people there are even Argo fans who are frustrated with them. I don't really call myself one of them in this camp. When we moved into BMO Field, which is the outdoor stadium, smaller. It's a 28,000 seater. It's a beautiful place to watch a game. It's an absolutely fabulous. And we've been in Sky Dome for almost 3 decades, and it was a terrible place to be. We were second-class citizens, awful place to watch a football game. So there was a belief that all you got to do is get it back outdoors at this beautiful facility, and the fans will flock there. Didn't happen. I was one of the people that said, we're dealing with 35 years of between neglect and abuse by bad owners over the years. And it's going to take 3 to 5 years to build back the base and get that place to 20,000 people a game, which I think is 20,000 people you could break even, I'm sure. Then, though, when it didn't happen, we've now had 4 seasons in that building, and the numbers are not getting any better. For a while there, I was saying, okay, it's probably more of an 8 to 10 year project. And maybe you could do it in 8 to 10 years, but I think it's pretty evident now that MLSE does not want to spend 8 to 10 years trying, and they may have concluded from market research and from whatever they've done to market the team, and they have done some stuff. Some people say they haven't done enough. I don't really buy that, because I don't know how much they've spent, and I don't know what they've seen as useful marketing or not useful marketing. It's an easy fix for people to say, just spend more money on marketing and you're going to sell tickets. It doesn't work that way.
Yeah, no.
So I don't think of them myself as a villain. I think of them as people that have been pretty realistic in figuring out this isn't working and it's not going to work. So we got to do something drastic. And this XFL idea, to me, is like the home run play. Let's go for the big bang. Let's come up with rules that make it really attractive to young people. Let's get on the betting bandwagon real big, because betting is coming.
Oh yeah.
And let's turn from this little dinky league that's been the same number of teams basically since 1954. Well, every other league is expanded. Every other league is 3 times as big as they were back then, or in the case of at hockey, they're 5 times as big as they were back then. Mm. Let's double in size, and let's get the marketing muscle of the Rock behind it. Maybe that's a veneer. I don't know. They also thought they'll bring in Bruce McNall and Wayne Gretzky and John Candy was going to be the salvation of the league. and it didn't save the league, and it didn't even really save the Argos. After that magical year, attendance went down the following year, and turned out McNall had no money, and it was all built on fraud, and the rest is history. But 5 years after they brought in the Rocket, they had the greatest player in Canadian Football League history. Doug Flutie was playing for the Argos, and they were an unbelievable team. Went 17-3 2 years in a row, won back-to-back championships, and they couldn't put more than 17 or 18,000 people into Skydome. So it shows you that it's been a long slog trying to build back interest. I don't see it ever getting back to where it was in the late 70s when they were on a par with the Leafs. I do believe that football can survive and can be a thriving thing. But to me, this XFL idea is, you know what? It's radical, but I'm in favor. I want to have a team to go watch, man. And
I'm the same way.
If it plays 4 downs and it's 11 man, I don't care. I want to cheer for the Argos, the double blue. I want to be there and be part of that, right?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that one of the critiques of the XFL, even though it was 5 games, as somebody who's a DC Defender season ticket holder and went to games, I will say that there was a much young, especially if you've seen the videos of the beer snake. I mean, I was right there. I sat across from them making this big beer snake that was all over the press and everything. All young fans, all like your 20 somethings. I mean, that's exactly what the league needed. And it was not like, it was families because it was affordable. I mean, there's a lot more to the critique that the XFL, doesn't have any players and coaches. We get all that, but there is a model that worked. I mean, the games were cheap to go. I mean, my season tickets, and I sat right on the bar where the end zone was. I mean, Oliver Luck, the former president of the XFL, was standing like right there. And I was like, "Hey, Oliver, what's up?" And he turned, that's how close I was. I think I spent $200 American for like 5 games. I mean, it was nothing, and it worked. And so I could see that type of playbook along with the playbook of the CFL, because it seems like Randy Ambrosie was trying to like get into these other markets, and there's this whole global draft and that whole piece of that. When did that just come with the Randy Ambrosie era?
Essentially, it goes back a couple of years. It was an Ambrosie initiative, as far as I know. Just to go back to your point about the fun and excitement and the youthful attendance. The fact is, the league, the CFL does have that. They have it in Ottawa. They've got it in Hamilton. They've got it in Winnipeg. And in fact, the beer snake began in Winnipeg. Trust me, they were doing the beer snake 30 years ago, right?
I've heard that.
So, but in Hamilton and Ottawa, the games are packed with young people who are there to party. They're not really there to watch the football game, but they're bringing their ticket dollars in, and they're buying lots of beer. And frankly, that's what kind of revived the Blue Jays in this market as well. It became the place for kids to go and party on the weekends. So I believe it is doable. The trick is, how do you break that through into this market? The TFC, the MLS team, to some extent has that. They've become the hip place for a crowd of 20 and 30 somethings to go and drink a lot of beer and do all the chanting that you do at a football game. Mm-hmm. And if the Argos could somehow tap into a similar vibe, I believe it could be incredibly fun for people to be there, because it is fun. Even with 12,000 diehards like me, it's an incredibly fun atmosphere. Mm-hmm. I think that, if maybe MLSE sees this as, we can't sell the tired old brand of Canadian football when we can't keep selling the Hamilton Tiger Cats and the Saskatchewan Roughriders. It's been said many times, and I think there is a lot of truth to it. When the Blue Jays arrived, and suddenly coming to town on the marquee was the New York Yankees and the Boston Red Sox, it made the Saskatchewan Roughriders look like, what? Like, why do we want to go see Saskatchewan Roughriders? I want to see the Yankees. I want to see the Red Sox. I want to see the Angels, right? And Oakland and all that. Mm-hmm. So, Toronto, I think, kind of outgrew the CFL a little bit. Also, the demographics have changed. I mean, Canada is a very multicultural country, but Toronto in particular is an incredibly multicultural region and city. You didn't grow up a lot of the people living here did not grow up with gridiron football. They grew up with soccer or basketball in some cases, because basketball is played all around the world. And if you really want to follow sports that matter in this market, you got to follow the Leafs. So football becomes kind of like an afterthought. And then meanwhile, every Sunday afternoon, you got three NFL games coming in the afternoon, another one coming in that night, another one on Monday night, another one on Thursday night. And they're an incredibly well-produced spectacle. And the NFL has gotten way more entertaining than it used to be. And the CFL entertainment value has gone down. This is the thing that really drives me crazy. I would, for most of my life, I was adamant Canadian football is more entertaining than NFL. I can't say that anymore. It's really not. The NFL has borrowed tons of stuff from the CFL. They finally figured out that they should sign the kind of quarterbacks that used to have to come to Canada because they were too black or too mobile for NFL standards. And so, if 30 years ago, Russell Wilson would have played in Canadian football, right? And Lamar Jackson and those guys, now the NFL's figured out how good they are. So we've lost that. And the NFL has figured out they go to spread offenses. They go to five receivers. They borrowed tons of the innovations of Canadian football. And at the same time, we've built up our rosters so big that it's affected, it's all these guys all these defensive specialists are now on the roster, and it slowed down the play clock. And so we get fewer plays per game than we used to. Because I wrote this book about the 91 Argos, I've been doing a lot of looking at old videos of games from back then. And I think 90 and 91 was the peak of Canadian football's excitement and entertainment value. And I've got a 30-second skip feature on my DVD recorder. And so I can watch a play. As soon as I hear the whistle, I skip 30 seconds and the next play is underway. And now that doesn't happen. Now, the whistle blows, and they move the yardsticks or they don't move the yardsticks, but the ref sits there and watches and makes sure that all the situation substitutions happen. And then he starts the 20-second clock and teams run it down. And I've sat in the stadium at BMO and watched the clock, and I watch, okay, so the whistle blew, okay, what's the time? And I watch it tick down. And we often have 35 to 40 seconds of game clock between snaps. And I've done some look. I looked at the stats for 2019. The CFL averaged 55. Each team averaged 55. Each team averaged 55 offensive snaps in a game. The NFL, it's like 71. There's more plays in an NFL game than there are in a CFL game. So we've lost the entertainment value. We still have some incredibly exciting things. We have way better kick returns and special teams and all that stuff. And I believe that we don't use the motion that we can use as much as we should, the offensive motion and stuff. But there's lots of value, and you can, if you do merge the leagues and you be smart about the CFL rules that you keep, you can make it incredibly exciting. But the first thing they've got to do is they've got to say 30-second clock, no reason to, like, as soon as the ball is as soon as that whistle blows, 30 seconds starts. Now you can't make your substitutions in that time, too bad, and maybe even 25 seconds. Let's be radical about this, right?
Yeah, well, the XFL spent a good portion. Basically it was Oliver Luck was the first person hired. And then I believe it was Sam Schwartzstein was 2 or 3 after that. And they basically focused a whole year on the rules. They took their rules to the spring league. They tested them out there. They tried Canadian football. Some of those, I remember them specifically thinking they were going to do the halo punt rule, but the American players they just weren't getting it. So they had to scrap it, but definitely they spent a whole year. So having those rule books is just another addition to the CFL. Now, let me close out with this, because I had on the guys from 3 Down Nation, and I'll ask you, I give you the keys to the kingdom of the XFL CFL merger or non-merger, wherever you want to go with it.
Yeah.
How would you do that? How would you put the league together? There's weather as a factor. What would you do about the rules?
Yep.
How would you do it?
Here's what I would do, Mark. I would, first of all, I would play something this year. You got to play. Canadian football's got to play this year. Somehow they got to get at least a partial season. And it's right now it's looking challenging because the COVID numbers are they're not moving in the right direction up here, and our vaccinations are going slowly. So I don't think we're going to get an 18-game season, but get something and get a 12 or a 14 or whatever you can get, but announce that this is the last season of traditional CFL as we've known it in the past. Make the Grey Cup in Hamilton this November, the Grey Cup to end all Grey Cups. It'd just be an amazing spectacle. Like this is our last chance with our before we graduate or whatever you want to call it. You have to market it the proper way, right? So you do that. Then in 2022, you start you run. The scenario that I have in mind is you find one more. First of all, you got to get the existing 8. Well, I shouldn't say existing because I don't know how many of them actually will come back, but hopefully you've got 9 XFL teams in most of the markets that you were in before, certainly in New York and LA and the big markets. But let's say you've got 9. You've got 9 in the CFL. You have a Northern Conference. You have a Southern Conference. They play at the same time. You play from April to August. A 16 game season played over 17 weeks with one bye week. And the way in my vision of it is you've got you keep the division. So you've still got the East and West in the Northern Conference, and you've got the East and West in the Southern Conference. The teams like the Argos would play 2 games against the other 3 teams in the existing Eastern Conference against Hamilton, Montreal, and Ottawa. So there's 6 games. They play 1 game each against the 5 teams in Western Canada. So now you're up to 11. And then you got 5 more games to play. So you play 1 game each against 5, whatever division in the South has 5 teams. Mm-hmm. And then the same thing happens in reverse. So the Western teams play 8 games in their own division. They play 4 against the East, and they play another 4 against the 4-team division in the Southern Conference. I don't know if the playoffs is 1 versus 2, and then in each division, and then the 2 of them meet. But whether you have a wild card or a third week or something, but whatever you do, you have a Grey Cup game for the Canadian Conference Championship in a neutral site like it is now. It's announced in advance, so everybody in Canada can converge in Regina or Hamilton or Ottawa or wherever for the Grey Cup. The Canadian Championship is held, the Grey Cup is held, and then the following week, which is no later than Labor Day, the XFL CFL Combined League Championship, and the World Bowl, whatever we call it, the $1 million game, if you want to go back to 2001. So, and then the same thing's happening down south. So the Argos would play most of their games against the teams they're currently playing against, but they get 5 games a year against Los Angeles, Oakland, whoever's in the Western Conference or whatever the conference structure is. And you go back and forth. One year, Toronto comes to LA, and next year LA comes to Toronto, whatever. So from a standpoint of keeping TSN, the broadcaster up here, happy, they're still going to get. You give them like all the games involving interlocking games between East and West in Canada. You give them some of the games involving Canada versus US teams, but you also open that up to another broadcaster in Canada, bring Sportsnet into the loop by giving them some games between Toronto and the DC Defenders. Mm-hmm. And also let Sportsnet and TSN have some games between, the Defenders and the Renegades, or, some other XFL games, like Southern Division games. That's what I would do. I would have April to August. You play your playoffs, have the big celebration Labor Day just in time for the NFL to start. You don't go head to head. Most people up here think that's nuts, but that's why I do it.
That's where I like that idea, and I'm telling you, and one thing that people forget is that now then the CFL money, they get to dip their toe in the American television money, and that's really where I've not heard. I've been, following football, following baseball and basketball. I've never heard anybody have to talk about closing any NFL team since I've been alive, right. Let alone, I've heard of some badly run franchises, but it's interesting now maybe money covers some bad play. Oh yeah, they've got so ownership much money coming in now. Yeah. The one question that people have raised, and it's a valid one, I think, is how much TV money can you actually get down south? Because the recent history has been that they've had either revenue sharing arrangements or we'll buy the time and we'll sell the ads or whatever. Can you get a big score? I'd like to think you could, particularly if The Rock really becomes
intimately involved, I should say Dwayne Johnson becomes intimately involved in promoting the thing. And if the rules are innovative and exciting and the thing is marketed properly, maybe you can get a pretty good contract in, for year 1 and year 2. And you really got to hope this betting thing becomes huge and that you're the vanguard of that you guys are leading the way and sort of encouraging people to bet and stuff. So we'll see. I mean, I don't know if it can happen, but yeah, I think there's no doubt in MLSE's mind. Well, I shouldn't say there's no doubt, but in my opinion, in MLSE's mind, that's what they see. They see a potential score here where they could A, sell more tickets, B, bring in more revenue from TV and other ancillary sources, and C, potentially grow the value of the enterprise. And they don't see the Argonauts value growing in the Canadian Football League. And I don't disagree with them. I hate to say it. I love the Argos and I've been a fan basically all my life, but I wouldn't be in favor of this the way I am if I didn't think it was necessary, because I do.
Gotcha. Cool. All right. Well, thanks, Paul. I mean, tell everybody about your book, where they can get it, and all the history behind it. And
yeah, absolutely. Well, so the book is it's called Year of the Rocket. When John Candy, Wayne Gretzky, and a crooked tycoon pulled off the craziest season in football history. It's primarily about that year, 1991, when Rocket Ismail signed with the Argos and Gretzky and Candy arrived and so on. But it gets into a bit of the stuff that led up to 91 and some of the stuff after it. Some amazing and really crazy things happened over that period of time. The book will be out. Don't know the exact publication schedule yet. We're kind of waiting to see when football is played in Canada, because we're trying to tie the release to the beginning of the Canadian football season. Yeah. But for sure, within a few months, the book will be out. It'll be available for sure online at places like Amazon. There's some talk we may be able to get a distribution deal in the US, so maybe you'll be able to find it in your Barnes and Noble, maybe in LA or something where John Candy and Gretzky are big. I don't know if it'll be in every single bookstore across the United States, but it's a hell of a read. I obviously I wrote it, so I'm biased, but I talked to more than 100 people, including all the owners, McNall and Gretzky and John Candy's family and all the players and coaches and people from around the league. Just a lot of really great sources that had lots of amazing things to say. I learned a lot of stuff that I hadn't learned before, and it's a fun story about what I think is, out of almost 150 years of Toronto Argonauts playing football, that's the one year that'll live forever. And so my book, I think, captures that, and that was why I did it.
Excellent. Cool.
Thanks for inviting me, Mark. I appreciate it.
Well, thanks for being on the show.
Glad to do it anytime.
Here's what you missed on the XFL Markcast.
Tremendous show today. Paul and I think I'm still sweating from our duel yesterday with Arash. How do you feel that went? He kind of, he got a little belligerent, a little bit dismissive. And, I had to bring out that arrogance that someone pointed out on a CFL board. I had to get a little arrogant with him and say, which league actually played some games last year? Was it the XFL or CFL? Oh, wait. It wasn't the CFL, and I hate being that guy, but Arash kind of brought it out of me. But it was a fruitful talk, and you'll get to hear that later on in the show. I hope you enjoyed that as much as we enjoyed bantering with him. I cannot oversell enough how great this talk is. Arash, normally we've been bringing 3 guests lately. I know that was getting a little overwhelming. I would say Arash feels like he is 3 guests worth of content that Arash brought. So thank you for that. We also have Spring League CEO Brian Woods coming up today to run down. They just announced all their stuff. Very excited to talk with Brian, ask him about our Jousters merchandise that we've been promised. I have the clip ready to play, and potentially a censor bell from Paul if I get a little too feisty with that. So what are you going to do?
No, but Reed, here's what you do, Reed. You actually have some leadership and some people who put together an idea and a plan. What you have to understand about the CFL is that, hold on. I just let you do your little rant. Here's the issue. The CFL has been poorly run forever.
Yeah.
It's been poorly run at the league side and at the team side all over the place. Okay? They are always thinking about now, the now, and they're always looking for, well, in COVID terms, they're looking for a vaccine. They're looking for a magic bullet to save the day. Okay, that's all this XFL thing is right now.
The one thing for sure is that we know we've got a little bit of a runway here. That the CFL has not played a game since 2019. They are teetering on the verge of collapse right now. There's a lot of things at play.
Of course, you can find XFL Markcast on XFL News Hub and wherever you get podcasts, including YouTube.
All right. Well, I wanted to address something. Last week, XFL Markcast had Arash Madani from Sportsnet up there in Canada on the show to talk about the XFL and CFL merger. Now, I don't know who this person is, nor should I. I live in the United States of America, and I follow United States stuff. He lives in Canada and does Canadian stuff. So I don't know who he is. And I knew that there was some kind of back and forth thing going on, and I was like, this is kind of interesting. I guess it will be kind of a good show. But I didn't get a chance to listen to it. I'm a runner training for a marathon. So I was like, okay, I'm going to go listen to this when I have a chance, when I'm running, because I have to go on a long run, so that I can kind of catch the whole thing. And so I went on my run, and I honestly lost track of how much distance I had. I ran 8 miles. Between miles 2 and 6, I completely lost where I was listening to this. And honestly, it was kind of embarrassing, and not for XFL Markcast, but for this Arash Madani guy. Again, I didn't know who he was until he appeared on the show. He doesn't know who I am, so whatever. The cliff notes for this long, kind of embarrassing whatever this was, and we'll get into the details of it, was basically he came on and said that the CFL sucks, the CFL leadership sucks, and the XFL sucks. That's basically his point through this 45-minute childish kind of thing he had going on. And I get it. We're all used to accustomed of these type of guys in the United States of America. We all know Mike Florio, and we all know guys like Skip Bayless. And I've had my issues with Mr. Mike Florio, and I'll get to that part in a second. But just some random things that was said, and then all of a sudden the CFL Twitter sphere was like, yeah, he's told them. Really? When I'm listening to, and hey, if Paul and Reed stepped in it, I'd be like, dude, you guys just got roasted. Either way, I'll just be straight up with you. And I didn't think that at all. I thought this guy was kind of pompous, is to be a word. And it just didn't make any sense to me, because there's more to than just this shtick. I've been in this business since I was in college, and not only in the internet business, but the communications world. I mean, I have a degree from Salisbury in communications. I realized that early on that you can't make money in this, and I went towards becoming a software engineer. This is something XFL News Hub is something I do on the side. So I'm not tied to anybody. I could shut this site down tomorrow and I'm perfectly fine. I just do it because it's fun, and I enjoy the league, and I enjoy the community, and I'm really excited about the future, hopefully, between the XFL and CFL. That said, one of the things he said was, there is nothing there other than moldy uniforms and expired helmets. What he was doing throughout the course of his interview with XFL Markcast is something that is called being intellectually dishonest. Now, we all know why there is nothing with the XFL right now. Yes, there is no players. We are fully aware of that. Yes, there is no coaches. Why is there no coaches and players? Is because they paused things to talk to the CFL. So coming on and being like, name your quarterback. We all know there is no quarterback. But you know why there is no quarterback. It's because they're talking to the CFL right now, figuring out what they're going to do. If the CFL was fine, and we weren't having this discussion that we are now, yes, we would have at least coaches, staff, etc., ramping things up for a 2022 season. We were always going to ramp up for a 2022 season, maybe 2023 because of things are going on. Why? Because clearly the CFL is having a little bit of trouble getting on the field this year, as well as some other sports. So the idea that, and what business in the world would hire coaches and players when they're not going to go on the field potentially for another year? So, and people rallying around that's somehow like, oh, he makes a great point. It's called being intellectually dishonest, because he knows, I assume that he understands that case. And honestly, based on him talking, I don't even think he knows much of anything about the XFL other than Vince McMahon and, as he kept putting it, the failed twice league, which again is intellectually dishonest. We know for a fact that it shut down because of COVID. I will tell you this, that Vince McMahon, the reason why he dumped it into bankruptcy, because his business actually relies on live gate, well, and essentially also Saudi Arabian money, and of course now with the Peacock network, etc. He was in fear, I believe, that the WWE could go down. So he was like, I need to save my money. And this, everybody surrounding the league, people covering the league, and not just us guys that don't work for a sports corporation, conglomerate, subsidiary, all knew that this was a success. And you could talk about the ratings. I can tell you TV shows that you probably love where the ratings are high in the beginning and come down. Everybody knew this. It was all very that's the only word I can describe it, is intellectually dishonest. And it was irritating because it was just a pointless conversation. And I'll get to why I think things are. Now, the other thing he talked about, calling him, again, the twice failed league, and the mergers don't work, and spring football, blah, blah, blah. I'll give you an example that you may have heard of two leagues emerging that's happened in the last, within the last 100 years. It's called the AFL and NFL. Have you heard of them? They merged. That worked out pretty well, didn't it? It did. Now, has spring football ever worked? According to Brian Woods, who is clearly a businessman, not a talking head, involved in the sports business, TSL, and you could say whatever you want about the Spring League, but in the same podcast that Mr. Madani was in, he said, Brian Woods said, that the USFL had $250 million on the table to stay and play in the spring, but decided to go at it in the fall. I would assume Brian Woods of the Spring League isn't the only person that knows of this history. I would assume companies with tons of money like MLSC, perhaps, maybe companies like Redbird Capital. I assume when Danny Garcia and The Rock purchased the XFL, everybody was kind of aware of this. I would even assume Oliver Luck was aware of this, and Vince McMahon was all aware of this. So this idea that this is never going to work and let's blame spring football will never work, this doesn't make any sense to me. So those things were said, and I was like, really? So, and then he talked about, Dwayne Johnson and Danny the Garcia have no idea how to, how to run a football league. And I would venture to say, I would assume that people within Redbird Capital know how to hire the right people to run a football league. Vince McMahon, which was pointed out in the podcast, didn't know how to run a football league, and he hired Oliver Luck, who, it was my understanding that the reason why Vince McMahon knew who Oliver Luck was because the AAF wanted to hire Oliver Luck. And the reason why Oliver Luck didn't go with the AAF was because of the financial situation the AAF was in. So he knew from the beginning that it wasn't going to work. Allegedly. But I'll just leave that for that. So clearly irritated by all of this kind of stuff and just this guy's attitude. I had to do some research because basically what he said was the CFL sucks, the CFL system sucks, the league, everything sucks, and XFL sucks, and basically, essentially being a Mike Florio, Skip Bayless. Now, if you remember Mike Florio and my interactions with Mike Florio early on, so when the XFL started, Mike Florio actually had on Oliver Luck, and he was very good about it, and he was like, "Oh, this could be a good league." Very, very good attitude towards the XFL. As soon as the XFL decided to go with ESPN, Fox, Disney, which the CFL has not done anything with, so maybe that connection could help the CFL. Once they did that, all of a sudden Mike Florio kept using the word that the XFL is a fledgling league. And clearly all of us in the know knew that he would never have said that if the XFL was on NBC. That's why he said what he said. And it will be funny because when the XFL, especially with the relationship between The Rock and NBC, I haven't really heard much about Mike Florio talking any kind of trash about the CFL or XFL. Why is that? Because Dwayne Johnson's television show is on NBC, and a big hit on NBC, I might add. Even though Dwayne Johnson has never done a 30-minute comedy show before. Also, Dwayne Johnson and Danny Garcia have never started their own tequila brand or drink brand or, the list goes on and on. Remember, he was just a wrestler. And look at him now. So the idea that you don't think that he could not run the league, and he will not run the league. He is a piece of the league. Redbird Capital is the other piece, and they have people in place to run the league. So that, again, that whole intellectually, I assume this guy knows the facts. And then I started digging a little bit deeper, and people were coming to us saying, hey, this guy is basically trolling. He's kind of one of these trolling type characters like your Skip Bayless or your Mike Florio types. And he's always had it in for the CFL. And a matter of fact, a lot of people in Canada don't even like him. This is what I was told. I don't know this guy at all. And then I started looking at his background, and it's kind of interesting of who he works for. So he works for Sportsnet. And what he does is he's a Major League Baseball guy. Toronto Blue Jays baseball is kind of, I assume that's where he's kind of at, which is interesting because he never mentioned the fact that spring football league going up against Major League Baseball is a threat to Major League Baseball 100%. To me, Major League Baseball is the BlackBerry of sports, and spring football could potentially be the iPhone to that BlackBerry. And I would assume that Major League Baseball would be very leery of a spring football league going on at the same time. Now, you can say, yes, according to some data, Major League Baseball is the second most popular, in terms of fans, this kind of thing. But you can also look at the data and say that, well, NFL football is clearly number one. I've seen figures where anywhere between 100 and 10 million people are fans of the NFL or American football, and 40 million are Major League Baseball. And then it trickles down, between the NBA and NHL, NASCAR, stuff like that. Now, spring football is not here to compete with the NFL. They just want a market share. And listen, it would be kind of interesting if 20% or 30% of that football audience was into spring football. That's a big chunk. And that big chunk is basically equal to Major League Baseball. Wouldn't that be a problem for Sportsnet and others who cover baseball when no one really, and I have to be honest with you, and maybe there are baseball fans out there. I don't know any, I do know some baseball fans, but essentially to me, honestly, no one cares about baseball. I grew up watching baseball. I'm from New York. I watched the New York Mets. Loved my New York Mets. After your little steroid thing going on with Sammy Sosa and Barry Bonds and Kurt, what's his name? The guy from pitched for the Blue Jays, Roger Clemens. He was a roid guy too. And then, of course, now you have all the Houston Astros and that whole thing with the World Series. So for somebody who covers baseball to criticize football in any capacity, to me, is kind of a joke. I mean, explain to me the economics of how somebody like Bryce Harper can get paid, I don't know, what is it, $200 million, yet his franchise is worth, what, $2 billion? How does that work? Why is the New York Mets, I believe, and again, I could care less about baseball, how is the New York Mets still paying Bobby Bonilla? Bobby Bonilla played when I was in like college or like high school even. Yeah, around that time. So this is why y'all need to calm down about this guy and be like, oh, because there's weird ties in the CFL world between TSN and Sportsnet as I'm learning this. And do I think that it was funny because he never, and him coming on the show, he never criticized MLSC, which really, outside of the Canadian sports media bubble, is sort of been portrayed as the villain of this. And it's interesting that he would never bring that up, would he? Now, why? Because Sportsnet has a 37%, I believe it is, stake in MLSC. MLSC, according to Rod Peterson, wants to blow up the CFL. So wouldn't it make sense for having Arash Madani show up on an XFL podcast to bash the CFL? Because it's funny because, if the roles were reversed and maybe Sportsnet was covering the CFL and had a CFL contract, do you think he would come on the podcast and talk a bunch of trash about the CFL? No, he wouldn't. Case in point, and why I talk about Mike Florio. So, your CFL fan needs to relax. And there's just a few of them out there that was like, oh, yeah, man, totally. 100-year brand, the CFL. The CFL was officially named the CFL in 1958. So, they were a rugby league for your 100-year brand, and then merged with other rugby players and became the CFL. There's that word, merge. Do you think when the CFL decided to go from rugby to football, there was these same people that were like, oh, this is never going to work. No one cares about football throwing the ball. We just want to kick it and run and all this other stuff. Again, the AFL and NFL were merged. And now you have the NFL. The Canadian Football League, your 100-year brand, which is not. You did not play football. You played rugby for a lot of that and then switched to football. Let's be honest. That's the truth. It's right there in front of you. Let's relax a little bit. So, that's kind of where my take is from this, is just somebody who is just kind of trolling the waters, as they say on the internet. And really, all he said was the CFL sucks, which apparently he always says. He says the CFL system sucks and the XFL sucks. And this is why I don't like dealing with people like that, because there's so many of them out there that they try to make a name for themselves by just trolling it out and just being this hated figure. And then I appreciate, I'm going to be 100% honest. Before I knew this thing was going on, there was something about a charity, and and you all guys were talking about $25. I was going to drop $100 on this charity. And to be honest with you, and I think it's a great idea, and I think XFL News Hub should actually align itself with the charity. But honestly, after this guy's behavior on the show, I was like, I'm not doing any of that stuff. He said nothing other than just trolling and just saying this sucks and that sucks. And there's so many people out there that do this kind of shtick. And that's all it was a shtick. There was nothing interesting he brought to the table. His solution, here's an example of an intellectually dishonest statement. His solution to the CFL was to start a flag football league. That's his solution. That's me being him. Now, when I listened to the program, that was a suggestion, not a bad one. I'll even take that suggestion and say, well, but it goes back to your money problem. Why weren't you complaining? You Canadian reporters who want to complain about the XFL being involved, and you Canadian fans, why aren't you complaining, you media types especially? MLSC has $2 billion in assets. Redbird has $4 billion. Why aren't you complaining about them? Because you can't. Because your masters, who you work for, won't allow you to. So get off your soapbox about bashing the CFL. I see right through it. You might get some extra Twitter fans or whatever you're trying to do when it comes to that stuff. But honestly, I just feel embarrassed for the guy. I feel embarrassed for people like Skip Bayless and Mike Florio a lot of the times too. Again, that's not my shtick, that's not my game, and that's not what we want to do here at XFL News Hub. We're about solutions and bringing it together. I want to see if the XFL and CFL never partner. I want to see the XFL succeed for the players. I want to see the CFL succeed for the players. And who knows, maybe MLSC is not the villain in this story. And maybe they're the ones that are trying to really change things, and it's a bunch of old fart rich dudes that don't have that are afraid of change and they don't want to lose money. I don't know. We don't know. But I at least want to be a positive force in what is to come with this merger, hybrid thing. We don't know what it's going to be. But I'm excited about it. And honestly, at the end of the day, as much as is it about us and covering the league and making money off of stuff or whatever, to me, it's always been about the players. I have never understood so much until I got involved with this stuff in 2018. You hear all about the big name stars, but you don't see the majority of players just trying to make it. And it would be fantastic. And everybody in the media, no matter what, should be, yes, we want spring football to succeed. And coming in with an attitude because you're afraid that the spring football will take a market share from your BlackBerry sport of baseball. Let me tell you something about baseball. No one cares about baseball. You could talk about all the numbers you want, but that's a bunch of old farts that watch baseball. Okay? Last I checked, I don't think the Blue Jays are even playing in your country. And number two, betting. I'll give you a little, here's just a little example of some knowledge that I learned running XFL News Hub, the number one, the biggest XFL news source out there by far. The other guys could talk about how they're number one or number two. They're not even close, and I have the data to prove it. The two biggest things, here's a little lesson for you that you may not understand. The two biggest things that we had generated from our site last year as the season was building up and when the season was going on was people wanted to know my stupid picks for the games, who was going to win, who was going to lose, and fantasy football. Those were the two biggest things. Let me tell you what baseball sucks at. Betting. It sucks. Fantasy baseball is okay. DFS baseball sucks. What do you think is going to happen when Major League Baseball, with its 40 million fans allegedly, has a spring league that goes head-to-head with it, that has games in Canada and then in the U.S.? See, Redbird Capital knows this. Danny and The Rock know this. MLSC knows this. And I would assume our intellectually dishonest friends who just like to go on around and just saying, this sucks, man. This sucks, and they suck, and everything sucks with no solutions, just divisiveness across the board. They should know this too. And that's what they're afraid of. So just be careful the approach to what's going on here. If you don't like change, hey man, I don't know what to tell you. Like I've said before, you can keep your VCR, you can keep your BlackBerry, you can keep, innovation, change is going to happen. Something needs to happen big to correct the ship for the Canadian Football League, and I believe the XFL is that key. You've gotten promises before, and you've gotten your hearts broken, but listen, I'm a guy that's always glass is half full, not a guy that's glass half empty. That's just kind of how I roll. And if this doesn't work out, oh well. I don't know what other options, CFL fan, you have out there. Apparently some of your teams don't want to play, according to Rod Peterson and others, that they don't want to play because they are tired of losing money. So you can bash and make fun of the XFL, which is essentially your savior. But see, here's the thing, and here's how I'll wrap it up. These people bashing the XFL or this whole thing, some of them don't even like the CFL to begin with. Case in point, Mr. Madani. Everybody told me he doesn't like, so why would we believe anything that this guy has to say? Because frankly, he said nothing. He said nothing. So what I want from the community is like, we're in this together and we want this to succeed for the players, for the coaches. I feel bad for the players in limbo in the CFL right now. And those XFL players, there needs to be an alternative to just the NFL. This is our only shot. Aside from a pandemic, the XFL would be playing right now. And you know it, I know it, everybody knows it. So stop. You could keep your shtick, but we here at XFL News Hub and XFL Markcast, they can do whatever they want as far as who they want to have on their guests. But for me, like I don't play this game. Okay, I'm not stupid. I know I could see through it, and it's really interesting. All this stuff that's going on in Canada, it's very fascinating. With Sportsnet and TSN, and the TSN guys know exactly what's going on, but they're not going to say anything because no one wants to upset MLSE, which basically owns all of sports of Canada. That's why this guy, if he had the balls, I would like to see anybody from TSN or Sportsnet write a hatchet piece on MLSE. That's never going to happen. So save your phony take for somebody else. And the idea that somehow he blew up XFL Markcast, that, my friends, is a complete joke, because that did not happen. All right, my friends, that's it for this week's show. Again, we want to thank Paul Woods, CFL journalist, and his book coming out about the 1991 Argonauts. Definitely want to do a giveaway once that book is ready to rock and roll. We'll definitely have a giveaway and definitely have him on again, especially if we can get to a CFL season. Also, my rant is my rant. One thing that I'm going to take away from this, because I'm a glass that's half full type of guy, I want to know, what I want to do is I definitely want to be able to support the players. And that's my big thing about all of this stuff. It really boils down to players and what is kind of best for them. And there needs to be a spring football league. And that's what we should be all fighting for together, regardless of borders and states and whatever. We all want that. We all want spring football to succeed. And so what I would like to do here at XFL News Hub, if you guys have any idea, leave in the comments, shoot us a message. Podcast at XFL News Hub, some really good charities that really support football players, whether it's retired football players, hopefully they got a good pension when it comes to the NFL. I mean, we know about concussion stuff going on there, maybe organizations that can support that. I will tell you this, back when Chris Nowinski first came out with his book, I got a copy of that, and I think I have it somewhere. Like before any of that thing was big, because I was involved with the WWE, and he had just retired because of concussions. So I had known about that stuff for a long time, and I actually have his book where he talks a lot about that and his life, which is really interesting. So maybe those kind of things, but shoot us a comment and on the YouTubes, send us a message on podcast at XFL News Hub, or even on on the site with the show notes. Leave us a message. Let us know what's maybe is a good organization out there that we at XFL News Hub can support. I'd like to support a couple of them. I think it's a great idea. Rather than giving my $100 to that whatever was interview train wreck deal, let's take that $100. I still pledge it, and let's give it to some organizations that support the players, former football players. I think that would be a great idea. And maybe, some of this concussion stuff, or maybe even youth football too. Any kind of thing, youth football in Canada, flag football in Canada, any of those kind of things. I don't know all these organizations, so leave us a message about that. And you know how you can do that? It's very simple, my friends. Podcast at xflnewshub.com with your MP3s or videos. Call 888-430-7692 extension 3. Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Let us know how we're doing. We'll read it on the show. And remember to like and subscribe to our channel. Tons of comments on our YouTube channel all the time. We appreciate that. We appreciate the guys from XFL Markcast. Definitely give them a follow. They're putting out fantastic stuff. And I agree. Paul had said on their program this past time, they do have the best XFL podcast out there, bar none. They set the bar, and all of us are in the middle and kind of down there. So again, we appreciate the work that they're doing. They were not burned. You heard my rant. I'll just leave it at that. So again, really important. We want some charities. Let's donate that $100 to somebody. Maybe if we split it up, that's our kind of XFL News Hub charity. I think it'll be a great thing. So give us some ideas out there. Even message us on Twitter as well. All right, that's it for me, folks. Again, we'll get to your social media stuff next week. I promise. We just had a lot of stuff going on this week. Remember for show notes, xflnewshub.com/xfl-podcast. Join us on the Discord. And that's it for me, folks. Again, thanks for listening. God bless. I might have upset some people. Who knows where? Hey, it's just my take. My only excuse is that I'm still just a little punk kid from Long Island. Is still somewhere in there. So, all right, that's it for me, folks. God bless you all. Stay safe out there, my friends. And remember, this is all about the players. This isn't about us. And that's my focus. And that is what I want to be the narrative going forward. All right, that's it for me, folks. And I will see you all later.